to invite our guest who's come to KHS. Remember, our vision is to learn, isn't it? And to learn and learn. And if you did not see his amazing bio, did you guys see it?
Yes.
Yeah, like, Dino, like, yeah. So, and he's Kenyan and part of us. And so, can you welcome Dino Martins? Thank you for saying yes.
First of all, just to say, I'm going to mess this up, but Obo Wanyu. And it's such an honor to be here. Thank you, Monica, for being persistent and getting me here, and really to celebrate the centennial of the KHS. But more importantly, I think this is the first audience I've spoken to which is not pigmentally challenged and chronologically gifted for KHS, and that is a huge accomplishment. So the energy and everything your chair and all of you bring to this as a members organization is phenomenal. I'm sure you'll be learning a lot about the history of KHS, but I just learned a little bit about it, which was very interesting. It was started by a group of people meeting in the New Stanley. So you can imagine in 1923, meeting in the New Stanley in the middle of Nairobi, and here we are 100 years later. So I'm really honored, Monica, that you've invited me, but more importantly, to congratulate all of you and to say, wow, you've really broken through in making this KHS chapter Kenyan in every sense of the word. And so I'm really proud to see this and very touched to be here. So as I was coming here today, I was thinking the last time I came up this way was going to Katheka Kai to do some research as a student, and how much this landscape has changed since then. That was in the early 2000s. I was doing a project on agriculture and grasses. We were looking at the pollination of certain plants. For those of you who know me, who've heard about me, I'm a scientist. I currently work with an organization called the Turkana Basin Institute, which I've got a copy of our report. Many of you will recognize Dr. Richard Leakey, who was the founder of the institute. And Richard actually had a very strong connection with Machakos and with Ukambani in general. And one of the people, we always end thanking people, but I think it's important sometimes to start out by acknowledging and recognizing people. So Richard, is a very dear friend and mentor to me. I was doing my PhD, and Richard came to my PhD defense, and I was in the US. He didn't tell anybody he was coming. So the professors, you can imagine how shocked they were, and he was sitting in the back of the room. But Richard came there because he wanted to make sure I did one thing, that I didn't stay in the US and that I came back to Kenya. And he said, we can't afford to lose you, and if you stay there. And I said, Richard, I'll come back to Kenya and I'll be unemployed. There are no jobs for scientists. And he said, no, we're starting this new institute called the Turkana Basin, and I'd been up there with him. And when I went up there, I went to the field, and one of the really amazing people who doesn't get as much recognition is a gentleman called Kamoya Kimeu. And if you look at this book, not only did we lose Richard, we also lost Kamoya. We have his obituary here, and I will share a PDF with anyone who wants to read it. And why was there this link with Ukambani? Because the Leakeys and many other people came to this part of the world because they knew people worked hard, and they needed people to come and help them with their expeditions in very remote parts of Kenya. And people were friendlier here, definitely friendlier at the time than in Turkana. Now we've been in Turkana for 15 years. People are very friendly there as well. But at the time, in the 1960s, you can imagine leaving Ukambani to go all the way to Turkana, leaving your family because you got a job. It was an option, a livelihood, and turning into one of the world's best fossil finders. So his obituary, we had Richard's obituary, but we also had an obituary published in Nature of Kamoya. So one of our own, and I think as Kenyans we always fail to celebrate our own, but I really want to acknowledge him. Even now, a large part of the team that are in the field are still people, Kenyans coming from Ukambani. So it's really amazing to see that legacy, and it's a legacy that we should all be proud of and be connected to. So the other thing I noticed as I was coming here today is what's happening, and what Dr. Monica referred to across Kenya is that hunger, that thirst, that desire for land. And I was shocked, because I haven't been here for 20 years, and to think, we were running around with my butterfly net and just along the road. Of course, now there is nowhere you couldn't even stop there easily with all the lorries and everything else. The world is changing, and Kenya is changing very fast. So what can we, as people who are interested in plants, as members of KHS, what can we do as we're part of this? And I think everyone here has a really important role to play in the current and future of Kenya, and I'm really thrilled to hear that you're fighting for that forest. Because whenever we have to get up to Turkana, we take off in the plane in this direction, and I'm always looking out, and that is the only patch of indigenous forest, and we can see it so clearly, that tiny patch on top of that hill, and it's so precious. So I really salute you for taking that on. It's not easy. But look at what Wangari Maathai did for Karura. Karura is now thriving. But if she hadn't stood up at that time and fought for it, there would be no Karura forest today. And I was in school at the time. I remember us going to march for the forests, the Askaris coming. She really fought. She put her life at risk so that we as Kenyans could continue to have something that belonged to all of us, and that's really, really precious. So that forest is so precious. It is precious to Ukambani, it's precious to Machakos. I'm thrilled to hear that the government is supportive, because there are species in that forest that occur nowhere else in the world, not even in the rest of Kenya. So because of social media, which I detest social media, but unfortunately my students and everyone keep putting me on it. But because of social media, I was sent a picture a few months ago of a spider-like creature that was photographed here somewhere in Machakos, near the forest. It turns out that it's not actually a spider, it's something that's much more ancient. It's been around on the earth for 400 million years. 400 million. We can't even, humans only evolved like a million years ago. 400 million years. The Turkana boy that Kamoya found, the most famous discovery ever made in Africa, in the whole world, that shows humans originated in Africa, 1.5 million years old. But imagine, this doo-doo has been sitting there for 400 million years. And you have that resource within your county. So it's something that's really, really important and really precious. And I really recognize what you're doing there. I know it's a battle, but it's one I think we can win. The other thing with Karura right now, having seen it transition, is one thing Kenyans love. We love money. It's true, isn't it? Yes. Monica didn't mention, how much money is Karura making right now? Hundreds of millions of shillings from users. So they're actually able to give both the Kenya Forest Service as well as support themselves and their communities, because guess what? People in the city are desperate to go somewhere. Young people, Kenyans mostly, yes, a few foreigners, a few visitors, the UN is nearby, but most of the visitors are Kenyans going there, paying their 100 or 200 bob, taking their kids themselves for a walk, going there on the weekend, and that's generating revenue. Given how close this is to Nairobi, plus the growing middle class in this area, that will become a really important part of both the economy and the ecology and the society here. You can imagine, if you go to New York City, where our headquarters is at Stony Brook University, the State University of New York, you will go to the Central Park. It's such an iconic part of that city. You go to London and you go to the Hyde Park and other parks, no one would dare touch those parks. There are more species in that tiny forest than in all of New York and all of the UK combined. But we don't value that diversity because some of us, we don't know about it. Even as I was doing the book on grasses, I was learning about those grasses. And I went to the herbarium in Nairobi to look for certain grasses because even though I'm getting older now, I'm not that old, and there were species I was finding in the herbarium that had been collected by botanists, including here in eastern Kenya, and we couldn't find them. So there are still species that I, as a scientist studying them, have only seen the specimen. I've never seen the plant in the wild. And those are the plants that as we walk around and we meet farmers, how are we going to support livestock in dry lands? How are we going to produce food for Kenya? So one thing that's happened, and so why do we need plants? We need plants because we can't survive without them. So I'll start the talk about plants, and if you have a question, feel free to interrupt me. We're standing on which grass? Let's see who read their grass book. There's paspalum, but if you notice between it, there's another grass as well. Kikuyu grass, Pennisetum. A very, very special grass. So Kikuyu grass today is grown all over the world. It needs wetter conditions. So this is kind of right on the fringe of where it will grow naturally, but you can plant it. Kikuyu grass. I was in Brazil a few years ago, and when they burn the Amazon forest, which is a terrible thing to do, but they're doing it to put livestock there for McDonald's and other fast food companies, what do? They plant Kikuyu grass. And they plant it from plains. And where did that Kikuyu grass come from? From here. And actually there were two places. It was collected in Nyeri and it was collected here in Ukambani. Because they wanted one from a wetter climate and one from a drier climate. And there was a grasslands research station that was set up in Kenya in the 1920s and 30s. And all they did, those scientists, was go around the country and observe the systems, observe what traditional people were doing, how were they grazing livestock, where was the livestock healthy, collected those grasses and started growing them in Kitale, which is now where Kenya Seed Company is, for those of you who know that area. Grass from there was then taken to Texas. Anyone been to Texas? Yeah? Did you have a steak while you were there? How was it? Good? Not as tasty as the Kenyan ones, but nonetheless, it was tasty. All of the beef in Texas, which is worth what? Billions and billions of dollars. It's a huge industry. Comes from one species of grass. A grass called buffalo grass or African foxtail grass, Cenchrus. That grass was collected in Turkana and it was taken to Texas. It set up their pasture system and their beef sector. Before that, they did not have a beef cattle industry. And it's based on this one Kenyan species. So we went back, we have a project with the University of Texas, so we went back to the site in Turkana from where this grass was collected. And did we find any grass? No. Because not only have we had multiple years of drought, the part of the world where I work in now and live in, we've had 5 consecutive failed rainy seasons. So there is no grass at this site in Turkana. There hasn't been for a long time. And there are many different parts of Kenya that are thriving, but there are also many parts of Kenya that are suffering. So right now, 4 million Kenyans, I think you've heard it from our leaders, 4 million Kenyans are facing what? Starvation. And they have nothing, they have literally nothing to eat. So we as an institute, we're a small institute, we've got 2 campuses in northern Kenya. We're trying to help where we can, but we're trying to also be sustainable. We're doing hydroponics, which is very hard. You can imagine, you think you have water problems here, come and visit us someday and see we literally have nothing, and the water you get is of very poor quality. It's saline, it's brackish, but we're able to produce vegetables because we had the benefit of technology. And the other side of this is we had the diversity of plants that we could call on. So right now, as we're struggling to support livestock, I heard cows being mentioned. I love cows. And everybody thinks, oh, as we were coming, we were leaving Karen. Have you seen the cows in Nairobi now?
Yeah.
Yes, and everyone's like, oh, they're causing traffic jams and they're messing on my, gate, my nice driveway. And but why are people with their cows there? Because they're desperate. And people are moving across this landscape. So another thing is those plants, grasses, many other species underlie our economy. I just had the pleasure of meeting our new American ambassador, because I work for an American institution, Meg Whitman. Some of you might get. I'm definitely inviting you to the next event, because she was the CEO of HP, of eBay. She's a billionaire, philanthropist. Very interesting choice for Kenya. But Meg said, come, and I want to introduce you to some people. I was telling her about the work we're doing. She's very complimentary. We're hosting a lot of different scientists and students from the US, from Kenya. She says, I want you to meet these guys. And they're all in their uniforms, and they're all standing at attention as she's the ambassador, she's standing in front of them. They're all lined up here. And I don't know anything about the military, so I'm completely clueless. I'm a scientist. Well, it turns out, like certain birds, they display their credentials on their chest. So you have a lot of colorful markings, which it turns out these are generals, and I'm like, well, whatever. And they're like, okay, we want to talk to you, Dino, and we want to talk to you about northern Kenya. And I thought, why do they want to talk to me, a scientist? And it was very interesting. As we know, the US have built a base where? At Manda. And this part of the world, we're seeing it's a critically strategically important place for global trade, for security, for climate change, for many issues. But Meg, several people asked her at this dinner, why did you accept to be ambassador to Kenya? And she said two very interesting things. She said, by 2030, the largest number of young people on the planet who are future consumers and citizens will be in sub-Saharan Africa. By 2050, most of the consumers in the world will be within this continent. And that was why she's thinking about engaging here. That's why the current administration in the US, notice they've hosted the African leaders there. Our president went and attended. They're investing huge amounts in the partnership because they are realizing actually they're almost late to the game with China having come in and become a big partner. Because what does Africa still have that is so precious? Natural resources and people, talented people with energy, people with ideas, people with, they want to go out and change the world. People like your chair, if we could have even just 10 more chairs of KHS in the country like you, this will be the leading conservation and gardening organization. I mean, you'll change. I know you'll change the world, and that's I'm very inspiring to meet you. So the other thing right now with northern Kenya, coming back to our plants, is there's no grass. It hasn't rained, but there are actually those seeds of the grasses there, and when it does rain, that ecosystem will recover, as will this ecosystem, which generally recovers quite quickly. But something's starting to change. Someone mentioned they dug 17 dams and they haven't. Did they actually get any water in them, or they had some but they've dried out? So I was before I joined Turkana, I was working in Laikipia, running a research center there at Impala, which is managed with Princeton University and KWS and a few other partners. And I had to build 10 weirs while I was there, because when I got there, they were taking water from the river. And you can imagine with American students, you're taking water from the river, so it means every day you're driving people to the hospital in Nanyuki because no one can manage with that water. It was a nightmare. So I thought, we have to sort this out. And the one way we sorted it was rainwater harvesting. something that when we do get rain, we can actually make use of it. Really thrilled to hear you're collecting weather data because it's critical information. I don't know where the nearest Met station is, but I bet there's probably only one official station for this whole county, or maybe two.
So I reached out to the Met station in Machakos I reached out to the national government. They have allowed and they have asked us to second 5 people with their land, and they will come and build the Met, so that you can measure rain. You have to commit to recording, but it will be used as the recording for Kenya, for this part of Lower Eastern. They currently collect from 3 places in the Lower Eastern, but absolutely poor because the people who are doing it don't record daily. Yeah.
So it's critical to have that information. In Laikipia, what we were able to do, we've been recording the conservancies, the communities, we put all our data together. And scientists are very clever. They can take data and they can make predictions. They can tell you what's actually happening. As much as this drought is alarming and it's terrible, this drought was predicted. I can send you a paper that was published in 2019 when we had so much rain and we were all celebrating together with the locusts and the cows and everybody. We were celebrating that rain, the grass everywhere. But a scientist published a paper and said, following this, there's going to be a drought. And it's going to last for multiple years. Nobody paid attention to it. With the Laikipia data, what we were able to do was to do a study, and we found some very interesting things, which I bet also apply here. And as those of you engaged with plants and farming will know, this will be obvious. Several things are happening. So the actual overall trend in rainfall is actually going slightly up. I'm really talking nonsense, aren't I? Because look at how dry it is. But it's going up in a very erratic way. What has happened now is the long rains, the rains that tens of millions of Kenyans depend on, have declined in reliability by 75%.
Wow.
So they're more likely to fail than not. I mean, look at the last few years. The short rains have increased slightly, but not enough to compensate for the loss of the long rains, which for generations, you talk to farmers, generations, we've depended on that rainfall. When rain does come, it comes in much heavier storms, and the storms are destructive. We've had no rain in Turkana for several years, but we had one storm last year, actually year before last, in 2021. One storm, only one rain event. It was so heavy it destroyed several of our buildings and uprooted trees that are 300-400 years old.
In April last year, we had one day with 100 millimeters. In one day, one afternoon, 100 mm.
Yeah.
That's the total of what we usually have in a whole.
Yeah. So we can see that happening here as well. And then the third finding was the timing between rainfall events had grown much longer. So in whichever way we look at it, it's a reality. And we can blame each other, we can, we love blaming each other as humans. We can blame the Western world who've been polluting the planet, and we're all talking about climate change. But actually, I think for us as Kenyans, we have to figure it out. We have to adapt or die. Adapt or die. And I think we're going to adapt because we're a tough people. We've been part of this landscape. Humans have been here for millions of years. I know we're going to survive. But one of those crucial adaptations is making use of the diversity of plants that we have. So in the book I've written, there's 100 species. And thank you so much to KHS for your support from all the chapters. But what we've done with that extra funding is we've produced a poster which is going to be printed. I will send copies to you and every chapter in the country. And we're distributing it to schools, to rangeland schools, to training centers. And we've also made copies of the book available to those who need it, who are not able to purchase it. So it's gone out to many students. While I was doing this book, I was able to actually show it to Dr. Leakey just before he died. He died, as you know, just over a year ago. We just had his memorial 2-3 weeks ago. And it was 2nd of January that he died last year. And he had come to our board meeting in New York. You can imagine, here's a man who had lost both his legs. You know, he had had 2 kidney transplants, he'd had a liver transplant. He had really suffered physically, but he was determined to come, and he was in a wheelchair by this time, fully wheelchair bound. Came all the way to New York for the meeting to just make sure we had a future and how we were going to manage. And I showed him the proofs, I showed him the poster of the grasses. And you know, even though he had been in so much pain and suffering, his eyes lit up and he started asking me, and he was like, yeah, and what about Eastern Kenya, and what about Northern Kenya? And he was recalling all these places he went to as a young man and explored as a scientist. And that energy, I think, is something I'm seeing here. That sense of wonder is something that's very central to what KHS does and to this particular group. So I'm going to give you some other sort of shocking statistics. How many people have died in conflict? We're not talking just about the drought and the starvation. Just in conflict in northern Kenya last year. 100, 200, over 1,000 people. This is direct, killed. People are killing each other for what? For grass, basically. And if there was enough of this resource, which is God-given and abundant if we look after it, we would not be killing each other as Kenyans and saying, oh, it's that community and it's that community. Eastern Kenya, when I talk to the DOD people, these generals with all their stars and stripes, were telling me, we need to know more about what's happening ecologically, because we are realizing with all these parts of Kenya, the instability, and of course in the wider Horn of Africa, underlying the economic crisis, the terrorism crisis, the poverty, the social crisis is an ecological crisis. And we are spending $1 billion a year as the US military here. Probably more than that. They'll never admit exactly how much they're spending. Military budgets are always very opaque. Yes. So they want to deploy some of that funding to ecological issues, recognizing that might help solve some of the economic and security issues that we are facing. And Eastern Kenya right now is one of those hotspots they've identified. And we're seeing it maybe not right here, but next door, Kitui, what's going on right now? Terrible conflict between people bringing their livestock from further east in Kenya, it's much drier, from eastern into areas where small-scale farmers are trying to eke a living. Both are suffering from the wider effect of climate instability, but guess what? As Kenyans, we only hear about it in the news as this person from this community was killed, and then somebody went to retaliate from this community. And actually, what we have to do is break through that thinking and realize all of our communities are facing the same challenge, and we all have to coexist. We all have to make do with the resources we have. We have to live peacefully as neighbors, and we have to do what? To, love one another. That, I was brought up as a Christian, so that's, my faith. But I think many people share that ethos of how will our country do in 100 years? So as we are KHS 100, I think KHS Machakos is going to lead KHS for solving the next 100 by providing those examples, which you see across the country of Kenyans actually leading and changing and making a difference. So I want to come back to two things before we go to see some livestock, which I'm really excited to do. I love animals, I love plants, so I'm excited we get to see real ones today. I heard about maize growing. How much is the maize sector in Kenya worth, including cartels? A billion?
No,
More?
more.
5?
About 5 to 10 billion.
10 billion shillings. How much is beef livestock sector worth? More or less than that?
More.
Who says more? Who says less? It's 100 billion shillings. Now think about this. We spend so much money on the subsidies, the National Cereals and Produce, the cartels, the interventions, the import, this, that. I mean, we could talk the whole day about that system. But that's 10 billion. Meanwhile, beef, which is 100 billion, we're putting nothing into it. Maize, at least there's research going on. You can get different seed varieties. There's Calro out there doing some research, trying to get better varieties. They're breeding for drought tolerance. We're bringing in GMOs from Israel and places. I know not everyone, some people hate them, some people love them. But we're thinking about how do we secure that? Are we producing enough maize to support ourselves as Kenyans? No. And when did that change? A long time ago or recently? Recently, in the last sort of decade. Kenya went from being a food secure country to a net food importer, which again, as Kenyans, we should be ashamed of. We have the most amazing soil and climate and resources. We should be able not just to feed ourselves, but actually to feed a lot more. So grasses are really critical in this because maize is a grass, a tropical grass, comes originally from Mexico, where it was domesticated by the traditional people there. And there are two groups of people. The Anasazi are one group, the Hohokam are another group, and they took maize from something that it looked like other grasses, something really tiny, seeds, a little fruit seed thing that big, to what we know today. And it took them 10,000 years to do that. Then, of course, we know what happened. The Mzungus went there and got the maize, and actually my part ancestry, the Portuguese, brought it to East Africa, where it's now become a staple. The other we enjoyed really delicious mandazis. What are they made of? Wheat, another grass. How much wheat are we consuming in Kenya today? It's becoming a staple. It's becoming even cheaper than maize in some places. Maybe not in the supermarkets right now, but we're apparently, if I looked at the statistics this morning, we're consuming about 27 million tons as a country. How much are we growing? 2 million. So we're importing more than 90%. And we're better off than other countries. So recently, we know the global politics, a gentleman called Mr. Putin decided to go and invade another country, and what did it had this massive global effect of having food prices go up, including here, combined with the drought. But can we afford that? If we have other global events, are we going to starve, or are we actually going to get our act together? What's the average rainfall here in this part of Eastern?
Total rainfall we had last year was 500.
500. So that is like
594.
594.
At least where I am.
So, and that came over, it was spread out.
Yes.
So you can't, one of the challenges with that rainfall, so if you go to West Africa or to South Africa, you'll find places with 400 millimeters of rainfall or less are growing crops. How? Because they receive all their rain in one season, one rainy season. We have our rainfall in two seasons spread out because we are on the equator. So we can't have the same system. So the only solution if we're going to produce food is to manage our livestock better and more sustainably, and to store water in order to support the plant life that is, the basis of our existence. So we're trying to do a little bit of this in terms of the research we do, and I can share more about that. but I know that we want to look at some animals. So it's 11:30. What I'll do is I'll pause and see if anyone has a question, and then we can do that.
Are you guys enjoying yourself? Yes. Oh, very. So, any questions for Dino? There's a question here from Mala, yes? Just use your mic and then I'll use the other one. Okay, this one.
Dino, mine is just to find out, are we better off growing crops in Kenya, or should we just become righteous and focus on livestock and make more money from that? Because we look at our environment and some people keep insisting on growing maize and beans, while you know for sure maize and beans is never going to make you rich, and it's never even it's not viable.
At least in this part of the country.
So, like now, naturally, here we're in Katelembo. I think at the top, people are growing coffee and tea, and then from where the soil just changes from red to black around here. This is actually abundant. Then from there was rangeland. So people will tell you people had cows and they would take them to KMC and everything, all the way to Sultan Hamud, going on and beyond. So we're insisting on growing crops because maybe we saw our parents growing, while maybe all of us should be righteous. And we should stop this cutting of 1/8 quarter business and just remain with. Let's move to a village and leave our 1,000 acres intact.
So that's a really good question, and it's a very hard question, because let's start with the politics around this. One of the challenges in Kenya is we give out title to land, and when you have your land, you're the king of your kingdom, and no one can challenge you, which is a good thing. It means the sanctity of title is very strong in Kenya, unlike other countries. It meant our private sector has developed, we've been very entrepreneurial, we see that land. However, for food production and for conservation, it's a big challenge. What we really need to do is to understand our land and say, yes, there are places we can grow crops and we need to, but there are also places where we can convert that vegetation, which is thorny and scrubby. If I forced you to eat those grasses, would that be fun? No. Or the acacia trees, we would struggle. But livestock can eat them and turn them into milk, into meat, into protein. That's very nutritious. I often have students who are vegetarians or even vegans now. You can imagine having a vegan in Turkana. It's very hard.
We have a set of vegetarians in
and my mom is a vegetarian, let me qualify that. So I respect vegetarians. But we need animal protein in our diet. And the challenge now in the West is people are going away from meat because it is the way they are raising it, injecting the animals full of antibiotics and hormones. It's causing many health issues there. That is not sustainable. The way we are raising livestock is far, far better quality, but the nutrition produced by that food is incredible. We've been studying the diet of the Turkana. Who finding really traditional people is hard, but we found some right on the border of Uganda and South Sudan. They eat 1,600 calories a day, which is very low. And almost all of it is fat and protein, milk and fermented products. So they should have, if you're eating that much red meat or fatty food, you should have high cholesterol. Well, they don't. And they are really, really healthy, and they are strong, and they are tall, and they have healthy bones and beautiful teeth, and they are the traditional people. However, most of the Turkana have switched to eating a diet of food aid, which is sugar, maize, high fructose corn syrup. So they distribute right now, it says on the packets, a gift of the American people, something called plumpy nut. Has anyone, I'm sure, luckily no one here has probably had to eat it. It's a yellow, a sort of really awful yellow color, and it's a paste, and it's supposed to be nutritionally balanced. But for the Turkana, whose diet was low calorie but high nutrient food, they've now switched to a very high calorie, low nutrient food. So guess what? the number of Turkana developing diabetes. Skinny, sorry. Very skinny Turkanas. You'd look at them and like, no, this person can't. And young people. We've had more and more young people, and not only are they developing type 2, not type 1, type 2 diabetes, which is the lifestyle one, they progress to insulin dependence very quickly. So coming back to your question, it's a crucial question because it's not just about food production, it's about health, and it's about our health as a country. And I think we really need to think about how we answer. There's no easy answer.
Any other question? Excellent. Okay, so we have a number. Well, okay, so start at the back because usually we forget those at the back.
Okay, my question was, you said that we went from a sufficient producer of maize to a net importer of the same. And I was just wondering, was it because of the climate change and we refused to adopt, or we didn't know how to adapt, or we just simply moved on to producing, other crops that were more profitable?
You're going to do two for that?
Sure.
Okay. Another person will be here. Let's take a lady. I'll take a gentleman on this side. Okay.
Mine is a quick one. I was curious about the paper you mentioned about that predicted the drought. Did it have like an ending?
My question is about what you mentioned about the security situation, and is there a way that the grasses could be used as a solution to that security, like in Kitui, for example, where is there a magic bullet grass that can be grown so that people don't have to move and fight over the grass? Is there, so that you're dealing with the conflict by making sure that there is no conflict rather than trying to stop the conflict?
Yeah. Let me start, Angie, with your question. And then we'll talk about maize and then about drought. So one interesting thing that's happening right now, Angie, is we have a species in several species, the Grevy's zebra. If you come up to Laikipia, beautiful, beautiful animal. There are only about 3,000 left, and a lot of have died, probably now only 2,000. But there's a conservation organization right now, and they're buying hay. They claim they're getting some of it from down here, so I'm not sure where they're getting it. But they're buying hay, and they're trucking it up to Laikipia and Samburu, and they're feeding 400 Grevies. And it's cost them so far $100,000. Now, as Kenyans, you can imagine the optics of this. I mean, I recognize it's a critically endangered species, but the livestock, of course, next door are not getting that $100,000 worth of hay, and they are dying. There's terrible conflict in that area. So yes, we can restore those grasses, but we have to change our mindset, and we have to change the governance system in that area. Because right now, for many reasons, lack of education, lack of awareness, insecurity, all those places are very, very difficult to work in. That's why we're seeing teachers are refusing to go teach in those counties. Why? Because they're getting attacked. Even I, as the scientist, when we go there, the first thing we have to do is check, is it safe enough for us to go and do our sampling, do our research. So we have to shift that paradigm. But I think we as Kenyans have to take charge of that. And we can start with our own land, as Monica said, here, let's turn it to be productive. There's over 1,000 grass species in this part of the world. 1,000. Another challenge we have is government. And I know it's always easy to blame government, but I'll give you one example. There is an NGO trying to grow grass, and there's a lot of money to do that. There's a wonderful project, actually not far from here, down in Chulu Hills. Women's groups growing grass. I've worked with others around the country. The problem now is you have to get a license to have seed of these grasses, and the government will only license one species. I'm arguing and saying, well, we have 1,000 species, why will you only license one? Well, we know all the system, all this bureaucracy and things we have to work through. So we need to recognize that diversity, educate ourselves, but also then really push the county governments, because the Constitution says the resources belong to who? The people in that county. And so people should be able to harvest the seed. But if you start harvesting seed of grasses in your shamba, technically you're doing something illegal. Of course, people have done this for hundreds of years, and that's what we need to do, is to break through that. Coming to the question about maize. So I don't work on maize, I work on biodiversity and grasses more generally. But my observation of maize around the country is that it's all those reasons you stated. It's not just climate change, it's also people have seen more profitable crops. But many traditional maize growing areas in the last decade are struggling to produce maize. And we've had in the last 10 years 4 droughts, which is basically a drought every other year, and now we're in a drought that has gone on for several years. So can we continue growing maize? Yes. We'd have to change how we grow it, when we grow it, using other techniques like irrigation and thinking, and we know about Kulalu and what's happening there. And I actually was proposing early on, rather than trying to grow maize in Galana Kulalu, we could grow grass in Galana Kulalu, where we wouldn't have to use all the resources, it would grow very well. You'd have to convince the Tsavo elephants not to go and eat all of it, but you figured that one out. And you could take it and distribute it to the rest of the country. So it's a question of that earlier question as well. How can we zone areas? But we have to understand those details. I can't just decide I'm going to go to Turkana and start living a certain way. I have to adapt to that ecology, the same here. What proportion of Kenya is now officially arid and semi-arid?
90%.
Yeah,
90%.
it's almost 90%. And that's a shift over the last 30 years. It used to be about 60%, it's now closer to 90%. So again, adapt or die is the paradigm. Coming to Timothy's question about the drought, when will it end? It will end, at least that's what the scientists are saying. We're in a phase that follows an El Nino. So those rains in 2019, 800% above average. We had more rain in Turkana than we've ever seen. And all the lakes are flooding as a result of those heavy rains. Then the La Nina phase follows the El Nino, which is when the surface temperature of the ocean cools down. For East Africa, that produces a drought. Normally, it doesn't last very long. It's 6 months to a year. This La Nina has lasted several years. So it's been really terrible for East Africa. The La Nina is going to fade out, they think, towards the middle of this year. But this is a prediction, it could be wrong, this is from the data I've seen, that the long rains will be delayed here. They might fail, they might be delayed, there's a variability. But there will be an El Nino that will pick up later in the year, so we expect the short rains now to be really heavy. And we should be preparing, we've dug our dams, we've got our tanks to collect our rainwater off our roofs, we've got our ponds, and if we're prepared, we'll have that rain later this year. So the future is that we just have to adapt, and we have to store more water, and the government is planning that. Now their approach is, let's build really big dams. So we have, for example, the Kwake Dam, we've got all these other dams being planned around the country. That is one intervention. It comes with a lot of environmental issues, but we can harvest water as citizens on a local scale and as associations, and more people are starting to do that, and that water then is locally available, and it doesn't come with all the political and other issues that you have with big dams that have their problems.
More questions, so let's go again.
It's not even so much a question, but it's more also coming here and also picking up on the water issue. I found it quite interesting how much water is wasted here even on a daily basis, which is for a country that can't hardly afford it. I mean, it's just daily use water. And the other thing is that water is still very, very cheap here compared to electricity or other things, which is also quite interesting to see. Also not really understandable. I mean, for me, for Europe, their water is much more expensive, even wastewater is much more expensive. And even there, the changes also, I mean, there even farmers are now trying to change even away from waste, and they're going to sorghum, they're going to other crops because they see exactly the also of climate change, and they're trying to adapt and do exactly the same.
Okay, one question, let's see the hands up.
So, it's exciting to hear you talk about Turkana because I work there. So, I think my question is to TBI. I mean, you guys have been there, you're producing all this amazing research. how do you cascade that to local communities? I mean, you know, Turkana has, in Marsabit, have the highest number of NGOs, really big NGOs. So how do we translate that data in such a way that some of us can be able to use it and then improve the plant life? I was just there last week and I kept thinking, there are discussions about developing the aquifer. And I'm scared what that will translate to, what will happen to that water in for the community. So how do you do that? How do we really change? How do we grow these grasses back in Turkana again? Yeah.
One more? Or two more? Okay. Let's go there. Next time.
Thank you, Dino. I think for me it's very interesting that you have grasses in East Africa book, and more from a medical perspective. So when you were doing your
she's a medical doctor.
Good.
When you're doing your research, did you come across which grasses actually cause allergies in our population? Because there's great morbidity, there's a big rise in allergies, not just in children, but also in adults. And for some of those allergies in adults, it actually translates to food allergies.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to hear.
I'll comment. Let's do 3 and then we'll do 3. Yeah.
That's too much.
So the question on water, I was just in a meeting about sustainability and we had someone from Singapore presenting. They recycle all their water, including the sewage, and make beer out of it. I'm not sure we're ready for that, but it seems to be popular. But we don't think about water as a cycle. We think about using it.
Can you repeat that sentence? Water as a cycle.
We need to think about water as a cycle, and that it's very, very precious, and we can reuse it. Our hydroponics in Turkana, which we started to feed ourselves, now we're doing it with the community. All the nutrients, all the water is cycled. So it's a much more sustainable way. To the point about Turkana, so I learned there are 1,500 NGOs working on water issues. Yeah. Yes. Which is, those are the ones we know of, the registered ones. So, yeah, we won't go there. But anyway, there's a lot of being done around these issues, and I think it's a good challenge is how do we get the research back to communities. Our campuses are in the field. When Dr. Leakey was building there, I can tell you, everyone was like, what are you doing? You're crazy. It's hot, it's remote, there's no infrastructure, the people are difficult. There was all these reasons not to do it, and he said no. I really want to do it and prove we can do it there and we can do it sustainably. So we're completely off-grid, solar power. We recycle all of our water. We're trying to produce as much as the food as we can locally. We are not yet there. We still have to bring some food in. And I felt as an institute, if we can do that, then we can actually demonstrate. So we're now, one of our interesting projects right now is looking at traditional breeds. Because we're always going for breed improvement, which works in certain systems. But in those hot, dry places, people have kept livestock for 30,000 years, much longer than farming. We've been keeping livestock. Farming is only 10,000 years old. Those traditional breeds, the red Maasai sheep, for example, even in this drought, if you came and saw some of those red Maasais, they're still producing lambs, they're still producing milk, and they're doing fine because they're tough and they're selective. And they're wonderful. The meat is really delicious, not fatty like the other lamb, the ones we see, the dorpers running around. But there are very few left. So they've had to work really hard to create this one herd of pure red Maasai. There's 300 sheep in that herd. Now we hope other people around the country will take it up. So those are the kinds of things I think we need to do. With the water in the aquifer, the challenge is actually, UNICEF, I'm sure you know, have been digging these boreholes, hundreds, and the county now want to dig hundreds more. This is where there's a disconnect between the science and development. Many of those boreholes are salty, or they're turning to become salty, because people didn't understand the soil conditions, the aquifer conditions, all these other issues. So we can desalinate the water. We actually do that on our east side at Marsabit. The water, it comes out of our borehole. It's 56 degrees Celsius, and it's really, really full of all kinds of salts and things. It dissolves even the pipes that are supposed to pump it. So we have to desalinate it. But we've developed a solar-powered system to produce 20,000 liters of water a day, so that we have water to use for ourselves, and then we share it with Catholic Relief and with KWS and the other. There are very few. We're 600 kilometers from Marsabit town. Is the nearest town there. So we have to all share the resources. But I think the answer is to have technologies, they're out there. How do we deploy them and make them accessible? And for me, the one thing is let's train and empower Kenyans. So the other reason the Institute was founded is that we would have more Kenyan students, not just from Turkana, but from all over Kenya, even from Ethiopia and Somalia, and then we share knowledge, and that makes things better. Coming to the question of health, one of our projects is sequencing genomes of people, because it's very interesting. We've done 1,000 genomes of the Turkana. We're looking at diet, we're looking at every aspect of their life. And in any two randomly selected Turkana, in that 1,000 we have, there's more genetic diversity than in all of us here. How can that be? Because the Turkana, as they migrated south, absorbed some of the hunter-gatherer communities that had been living in those regions for a long period of time. And so that added to their genetic diversity. And it's so interesting, we were making fun of the racial composition of different things. And when I go, it's so interesting, I go to parts of Turkana and I get called Mzungu. When I'm in the US, I'm black. No question. And you're like, okay, so what are you? But it's such a ludicrous concept, because most human diversity, if we were to draw a tree of all human diversity, the trunk, the main branches, and most of the crown of that tree would be African. And everybody else is on a tiny side branch. So, that it just changes how we think about that. But coming to the issues of diet and health, all of the data is for that tiny side branch. There's no data on how all the human diversity actually works. And so that is a big gap that we're trying to fill by working with the communities and really engaging so that they can be co-producing this knowledge. I'm really adamant that scientists must not parachute in and out of communities. We must be there, walk the journey together, and have that knowledge be shared. It's easy to say that, it's actually very hard to do it because of the way science is structured, but we're trying to make some steps forward on that.
All right, let me take the last three questions. I'll start here.
In Kikuyu, that variety is called Kigobe. Kigobe means a big cow. Yeah. So it was for that purpose. The other thing, you touched about farming being political and also about land. I'm very passionate about land, especially in this country, and the history of land. You were talking about the sanctity of the title. Where I live in Kiambu, the other day I drove about from where I live about 50, 60, 70 kilometers out. All that land is owned by a handful of individuals. They can't run it, it's coffee. They cannot run it, they're not interested in it, the children, it's a second generation, and it's owned by individuals. And there was a community there. So I think we need to change our policy. What they're doing now is that they're building these high-end sort of exclusive housing estates. I think that is criminal. Because they don't own the land, it's a Kenyan resource. That is probably the most precious soil and water and land on the planet. And we're food deficient in this country. But a few people are allowed to speculate. I think that the sanctity of the title is good, but I guess it's something we need to think about and rationalize. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
For those who are at his home when we visited, you know the history of land, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. This is very much a question for you as a grass specialist. You mentioned maize is a grass, wheat, oats, barley, rice.
Sugarcane.
They're all grasses. Yeah. Sugarcane, as you just said there. It's a long time since I saw the figures, but I think it's something like 10 species of grass are used for food, out of many thousands of species. Is anyone doing any research on the species that are not currently being used for food as to whether or not they could be used as they are, or maybe scientists can, nasty word here, genetically modify some of these species that are not yet being used for food to effectively do in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years what we as a species have done in 10, 15, 20,000 years.
Thank you, Dino. This has been truly, truly amazing. And I say that because for a couple of months now, I landed on farming very accidentally, out of need to produce my own food. And because of what happened then, ended up traveling around the country. And what Dino is telling us about the Eastern region is opening our eyes to how blessed we are. Because what has happened in the highlands where I come from, we have locked our soils. And so no matter how much rain we receive, as opposed to increasing our food security, it has gone down. The health of our soils in the highlands has gone down as well. While the ASAL areas have remained virgin and very authentic to their identity. And so if we all take what he's talking about and work it to maintain our identity now in the Eastern region, we will be the food basket for this nation. And so then we can decide that we are not all going to plant maize. We will have ranchers. We will have those planting their mbaazi's and vegetables in our what is virgin soil compared to the highlands now. So thank you, Dino, for that information.
Final comment, thank you, Shiro.
Mine is not going to be as scientific, and I'm from the western part of the country. Not going to be scientific. But we had Najma here some times back, and she told us trees. Now we have grass. So it's trees versus grass.
Both.
Yeah. So how does it go on? And then secondly, I want to raise chickens as road runners, just running around and eating. And I wanted to plant a good portion of my land with grass. And the only place I could go was Kenya seed, and the only grass I could get was Rhodes grass. And I thought I wanted a grass that had flowers because I also have bees. I tried to find those seeds for there. Yeah, exactly. I can see you shaking your head. So if you can assist there, it would be really interesting because as I'm trying to look for flowers indigenous to Kenya, I put that into Google. They brought me the flower farmers in Naivasha. I'm like, no, not those ones. Yeah, so as we are going back, I'd really like to see if we could help us with that.
So thanks. We are going to wind up with those three.
Okay.
We have more questions, but I know, so why not we will close it up?
All right. Just to respond to the comment on land, I really agree with you and I support that. Let us zone our land, and each county, as the government comes in, they've just come in, they will have created a CIDP, a County Integrated Development Plan. Each county is supposed to, by law, develop a CIDP, a County Integrated Development Plan. And citizens are supposed to be part of that, and ideas and science. In Laikipia County, we were very lucky to have an enlightened governor who engaged with us and put science into the CIDP. So each county has to develop a county integrated development plan. And that plan includes land use and how it's going to be allocated, how it's zoned. And it really is a good idea, but we need to make sure counties take up that responsibility, but that we as citizens engage with it and provide information. And KHS and others should be partners at the table with scientists and others to make that happen. Land is such an emotive and funny issue in Kenya. I was just down in these Dakacha woodlands, which are north of Malindi, huge area, beautiful, beautiful area. And people again are going there and being told buy land very cheaply, clear, grow pineapples. The pineapples don't do well. It's an arid ecosystem even though it's a forest. But it's that attitude of how we value, what are we valuing as land? And right now, across the country, the subdivision is occurring at a frightening pace. So just before I left Laikipia, our trustees had paid to buy a piece of land to create a corridor between Olpejeta and where we were so that wildlife could continue migrating. But next door, somebody bought, they divided it into 4,000 plots. Just as you drive out to on the Rumuruti Road. They opened the sale on Saturday morning. By Saturday afternoon, all the plots were sold. People who came on Sunday were buying from people who bought on Saturday and paying double or triple what they had paid. So I think we have to think about that, that speculation. Maybe it should be taxed. I don't know what we have to figure out something, because it's a runaway thing, and I agree 100%. The most agriculturally valuable land in Kenya is being turned to real estate. And it's ridiculous because we don't value the land when it has nature on it. We turn it to agriculture, it's a bit more valuable, but you turn it to real estate and the return on that land is unbelievable. When I started this job I'm in, there was a piece of land we were hoping to get. It was 400,000 shillings. We didn't get it. I was trying to convince my board, and they're like, no, we don't want to buy that land. That piece of land sold the other day for 40 million shillings. And so I was like, see, you should have bought it. We could have paid a lot of money. We didn't do that. We didn't want to buy it to speculate. We were trying to think about a sustainable project. So we've got to think about this real estate valuation, because it isn't producing food, it's concentrating wealth in very few people's hands, and it's a recipe for social chaos at some point, certainly, as more and more people get pushed out. And the issue for the dry lands now, the question that was asked, the comment is, in all of Kenya, the trend is to subdivide land and register titles. And then what happens, somebody in an area gets 100 or 200 acres, they sell 5, they sell 10, they sell, then you're in that trajectory of now just selling, subdividing to just get some money. It's not sustainable. And for people who keep livestock, it's terrible. And that's where then a lot of these other conflicts start coming from as well. So I think we probably have a better chance of addressing it at a county level than at a national level, where the politics is just too emotive and the interests are so vested. But at a county level, with enlightened governance, local leadership there, counties have a lot of power, and that's, I think, the way we should try and solve it.
I think there's one comment from Bob. Did you answer that?
Let me answer, Bob.
Yeah.
So a very important question on grasses and why can't we use the ones we have? Absolutely. Is there research being done? Not enough. And I think, again, the grass work I have is funded by the University of Texas, by a donor in Texas who has 6 ranches. He's a rancher full of African grasses. He even has African animals. He has black rhinos, he has antelopes, he has all sorts of things. He has beef cattle. But he's really interested because he's got these 6 big pieces of land and wants to use them creatively and sustainably. I bet you there's not a single researcher in Kenya who's funded to do work on Kenyan grasses by Kenyan resources, apart from KHS's donation to the educational work. And that's our challenge. So the previous government committed 3% of GDP to support research. We never got that. They had a little bit, they created a national research fund. I'm hoping that this government will recognize the value of research, and let's not even commit 3%, let's make it 5 or 10%. Support the research and deliver it to people so that it's useful. Where are we going to get seeds? It's the same challenge. Right now you have to get it from Kenya Seed. That's because there's a license process. Rhodes grass is available, but it's not suitable for many places. Buffalo grass, Cenchrus, is much better for the dry regions. The chickens will love it. There are lots of doo-doos that go in there. The chickens will eat them. It survives well in drought. Getting the seed is not easy. There is some seed supply with NGOs. But I think the best thing is, as a group, go to someone who has grass and harvest the seeds and get it growing yourself.
Can we give a standing ovation to them? Can someone do the thank you in Ukambani, in Kikamba for us, for Dino, to take to his people? Yeah, Lower Eastern is Kikamba, isn't it? We honor the language of this region.
Okay, Dino tuenda kuwasiliana sana muno. Mundu watu kundisia maundu maingi muno. Na nitu manaka na ngai mutwathimite kukwitu ona kubwa na nwasiani wakawethe akwa bindukie na twasya kana nitetukisia nesa na lengi ukuka withia kwikibathukania muno nitusubia kiwu nitumanda undu tukwikana na silanga ila sikuo nikenda wisekwithia nitabanda miti tuongela na nikisu cionthe ila sikukamba nitunamba kuandikwa nitumanda undu twikana asu. Asante. Thank you very much for teaching us about our own environment. We're very grateful as people in Ukambani. We have come and found change, but we have listened that we can do a little bit more, like the aspect of collecting water and using it. And with all the varieties of the process and the different vegetations that are around here, we can do much more. So we want to grow that which is indigenous to our land. And next time we come to find a place.